All right, so once again, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Tonight, our family night is called Anti-Racism and the Muslim Community. I know this is a hot topic right now. It's very, very relevant. So we've got a great lineup of our speakers tonight, and I think we're going to learn a lot from them and inshallah take some action items moving forward. So just, housekeeping rules one more time. Everyone is muted. Please try to keep yourselves muted. If you'd like to turn on your camera, feel free to do so. It's always nice as a speaker to be able to see who they're, talking to, since we're all sort of stuck in our own homes. So by all means, feel free to turn on your cameras, but we'll keep your mics muted. And then after our speakers are done, we'll have a moment for Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, you can either send us the message or you can ask the question yourself at the end. So we're going to get started. In the beginning, we would like to have Imam Abdul Hafiz recite some ayahs for us, and we can get started from there.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Most Merciful. والعصر, by time, verily men are lost, except for those who believe and act upon that belief with actions, and who come together with mutual teachings and understanding, consulting each other in patience. Ameen.
Jazakallah khair, Imam. So I'm going to go ahead and get started and introduce our first speaker of the night. Today we have Sister Kenyatta Bakir. I'm just going to read you her bio real quick. She was born and raised a Muslim here in Los Angeles, California. She's got a bachelor's degree in child development and a master's in early childhood education. She also has a 1 year of a doctorate in interreligious studies from Claremont School of Theology. One of her great achievements is she's actually helped open several schools, including her own preschool. I know we're all familiar with Isla Academy, and she's also helped with opening Isla. And if you're not familiar, Isla is a Muslim school that serves the people of South Central LA. And then also she's opened up a charter school, helped open up a charter school in South Central LA, which is housed at Bilal Islamics campus. She's also an adjunct child development professor for the LA Community College District and a senior trainer for Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative, and also a Black Lives Matter member. In her free time, she likes to hike at the beach and go to the park, and she also practices yoga and meditation. So if anyone has any self-care questions, feel free to ask Sister Kenyatta. So with that, please help me in welcoming Sister Kenyatta Bakir.
Assalamu alaikum. It's great to be with you all tonight. In the name of God. So tonight, I want to first thank you all for inviting me to come. It's been a busy month for Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative. We have fielded many requests that have come to us recently, and we've had to do a lot of apologizing because we're a small staff, and we've gotten triple our requests overnight, literally. And so we're grateful that this is happening because an awakening is occurring amongst Muslims, amongst non-Muslims, Black folks, all different nationalities and races are really having this kind of eye-opening conversation. So I wanted to start there. Do you want to have the questions given to me or just ask them, or you want me to just kind of paraphrase them?
You can just answer them throughout your talk. That's fine.
Okay. I don't have them pulled up. I have kind of like a general overview.
I can open them I can ask them for you if you'd like.
Could you do that?
Okay. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Okay, so our first question, in our masjid and other community events, generally people are comfortable socializing within their own racial groups. It's probably due to unintentional biases, but how can we recognize our own bias, and how can we explore the underlying reasons why? And then what do you suggest we can do to overcome this?
That's a great question. So first of all, in our environments, we go with what's most comfortable, right? So if you are of Black descent, you will tend to navigate to folks who are of Black descent, right? That's in most cases, right? If you come from Pakistan, you may navigate to Pakistani folks, right? And it's because of understanding, right? It's because of commonalities, right? It could be culturally, it could be about food, it could be about language, right? Um, and that's not a problem. It's a problem when that's all you ever do is select that group. So that's where it becomes. So all of us have some kind of implicit bias. Bias is in every person. So if someone says, "Oh, I'm not biased. I love everyone. I'm colorblind," actually that's considered a form of bias when you say you're colorblind, right? And it's a form of racism, but people don't always understand that. So there's two things that happen. There's the conscious mind, right? What we do in our everyday lives, what our thoughts and our patterns that we say, right? So it's kind of like our representative is what we usually term that, right? It's those niceties, right? It's the appropriate things that we say in public. It's please, thank you, those kind of things. Then unconscious mind is the majority of it, right? That's more 75% of where we kind of lie. So our unconscious mind really is what happens when those things occur, when we go into those own groups, right? So we unconsciously just go and navigate to people that we are aligned with. What we have to do is recognize it first, right? So I'll use myself for example. And tonight, I want to put us in a one mic and making sure that we do I statements instead of we statements, right? So for myself, what I tend to do, even though I was born and raised in a Black space, traditionally South Central LA, right? Have navigated and gone to other parts of the country and the world, I tend to navigate to Black folks who are Black American descent, right? And traditionally Black Muslim descent is where my navigation occurs. So what I do is in my conscious mind, I always stand up and say, hey, I'm going to talk to somebody that I would never traditionally talk to, right? Who may not have any of the same commonalities as me. Now, we all have the same commonalities as far as being Muslims because we're all Muslim, right? And we all pray 5 times a day. So those things, right? But maybe my language is different from that person, right? Or their first language may be a different language, right? They may be younger than me, right? And they may have a different ideology than myself, right? Even though I'm Muslim and all of us on this call traditionally are Muslim, we may have different viewpoints of how we look at society, right? So I would gravitate to that person and have a conversation with them, but not just a conversation to just pick them apart or just to say that I went and spoke to that person. I would go and authentically want to hear from that person. And I would not try to overwhelm the conversation. So that's what we're saying specifically when it comes to uplifting Blackness. We're saying folks don't really understand uh, the Black experience from time to time, right? They may have gotten their information from the media, right? And we know the social media can have its own nuances, right? And it can be hyper vigilant, right? We have this where folks are just constantly feeding us this information. So there may be assumptions of things that are occurring. So if I was a person that was to shift, right? So say if I was from another country or from another race or ethnic group, I would say shift and go reach out to a Black person that's coming into the masajid, not asking them questions of, did you convert to Islam, right? do you know Al-Fatiha, right? Because that is considered bias too, right? And it's microaggressive. And so in Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative, we speak about what microaggressive behavior is and how that occurs, right? Those are those little things that people say to us or interactions that they give to us that don't feel great, right? Somebody might say, oh, um, so you went to college and your father and mother went to college, right? Those kind of things. Those are microaggressive in behavior. So we know that in our holy book, I'll end with this. In our holy book, it speaks about, and forgive me, the imams on the panel. Uh, yes, I was trained by Sheikh Shuaib, may Allah be pleased with him, radiallahu anhu, and he would be upset with me because I will butcher the Arabic right now. So I'm just going to use the English. This is when I was in elementary school, Muslim school. But we know that Allah says that He has made us in nations and tribes, right? So that we may know one another, right? And that He wants us to learn from one another, right? So we know that we have these differences, and there's differences that are spoken upon in our holy book, right? That talk about our languages and all of our colors and shapes and sizes, and all of that is to be celebrated. So we would want folks to do that in a simple way, right?
Yeah, that's actually really good. I think that's something we can all learn, like just something small we can take. I think communication is very helpful. So that's great. Thank you for telling us some tips. Okay, so I have another question for you. So kind of along the racial, ethnic lines, so our society continues to exhibit inequality in providing reasonable opportunities like healthcare, education, housing, shelter, employment, so forth, to just some members of our community. As Muslims, how can we voice our concerns and advocate for equal opportunity for all, as per the teachings from the Holy Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet, peace be upon him?
Islam. I believe we need to do what our beloved prophet did. He has given us really uh, not even just a baseline. He's given us the sunnah, right? He's given us a path that he did. The one thing that I loved when I was a child, when I read the stories about our beloved prophet, I always thought to myself, he just really seems, and forgive the colloquialism, he just really seemed like a cool dude, right? He just seemed like somebody who was very approachable, who really wanted people to succeed. He seemed like a people person, right? I'm a people person, so I align with that. And I mean, you think about it, he had tormentors, right? He had a woman who threw trash on him for years, every day. Can you imagine coming out your house and somebody throws trash on you every single day? That's unreal. Most of us would, probably do something that is dramatic, right? Maybe even put our hands on her. He did not, right? He constantly stayed patient. He stayed vigilant, right? And he visited her when she became ill in the hospital, right? So some of us can't come to that level, right? That's why he was our beloved prophet. But what I would say is to take Salah is to take his example of how he was towards people, right? And even in his last sermon, right? And how he spoke about no Arab is better than a black person, and no black person is better than a white person, right? So uplifting that. But what we can do as Muslims, my family, I have to say, has been in the local politics for a long time. My father even ran for the Los Angeles School Board. Both of my parents were teachers. So we were very active in our community, and we were very hands-on. And for a lot of people, they didn't understand it, right? Here we were, these Muslims, visibly Muslim, right? And helping in our community, but not just helping Muslims, we help Christians, we help Jews, we help agnostics, whomever, right? And we spoke about what issues needed to be uplifted, right? So we know healthcare is not adequate for all folks. We know that, right? We know people are, well, right now with COVID, folks are really unemployed, right? But we know that Black Americans are experiencing COVID-19 at a higher rate than anyone else, right? And that's because of discrimination. So what we can do is we can lend our voice. I'll speak to what we did with Isla Olay last week. we did a rollout, and what we called it was a rollout for Muslims for Black Lives. And some of you might have been a part of that. I was in the car because I'm still sheltering in place. I'm not having contact with folks. So if you were there, it was great to see it. I took lots of pictures. And what we did is we spoke about some of those issues, right? So you can do that, right, in a protest rally kind of situation. You can write open letters. You can write to your council members, right? You can be in support of funding that comes down, right? And just be an advocate, be a voice, right? So if you're a person who has, higher means and is more affluent, you should be the one that's vocalizing and saying, I want people to have health insurance like I have, not on a mediocre, kind of way. I want them to have access to the best hospitals, right? I want them to uh, feel like they can, that their children can have resources. So I'm a former principal with LA Unified School District. If you go into South Central Los Angeles, right? Not the charter schools, but the Los Angeles School District. First of all, their API scores, which is a rating of of children and by their education of statistical data and taking tests, which I could go into on a whole other spectrum. I don't always align with that. Their scores are from 1 to 10, right? Most of the schools in South Central LA range from 1 to about 3, right? So we're talking about far, far below basic of reading and math and writing. The reason a lot of those things are happening is because they don't have the same resources, right? I was a preschool teacher that used to buy supplies out of my own money to supply for my children, right? But if you go to more affluent areas in the school district, those people have all of the resources. We saw this happen even with COVID-19. They had Wi-Fi, they had laptops that were provided from the schools already, right? But in South Central LA, they did not have the resource. So what I would say is get in your car and go across a few miles and go to some of those meetings and council members events and speak up and use your voice. That's what I would say.
Well said. Okay, I'm going to ask you one more question.
Sure.
So in general, in the context of race and racism, our generation or the younger generation and the older generation, they differ quite a bit. What can you shed on why is the perspective of the two generations so different? And then what can we do, both the younger and the older generation, just to better understand the others and, kind of bridge that gap between the two?
Well, I think what happens is we all get stuck in our, current age group, right? So we know I'm considered a Generation X, right? I'm 49 years old, right? So we know we have millennials, right? And we have Generation Z, right? And we also have the baby boomers, right? So in the baby boomer era, which is my father and mother's era, it was about work, right? You either went to college or you got a trade and you worked. Either way you did it, right? And you made a way for yourself, no matter what was going on, right? My generation, we did the same thing, but it was also some laxness in that because some of our parents felt like their generation was, had it really kind of rough, right? Millennials, it's a little bit more with the technology and the computers, right? So we see all of these shifts that are happening, right? So if you're of an older generation and you don't kind of get with the time, like I have to say for my father, he's always been very current. So when I was listening to hip hop music, that was conscious hip hop music, my father was listening to conscious hip hop music, right? And he was telling me what groups, right? And it was kind of shocking. He was a high school English teacher. And folks would say, oh, that's so cool. Your dad, knows all of these things, right? But he also did Jumu'ah Friday at the school, right? And he had a lot of students to take Shahada because of him doing that, right? So I didn't think it was so cool that he knew all of my culture and, all of the latest current stuff at that time. Now I do, right? But at that time, it was like, well, why are you knowing all of my things, right? And so we began to kind of swap and switch. Like I love jazz now, right? So it's about being open, right? It's about being um, kind of stepping outside of your comfort zone, right? So when we do our training, we talk to people about biases and about just being very closed off. And we do an implicit bias test where we have people take the test and kind of find out where their biases are. And we say, we want you to sit in the uncomfort of what you just found out. Because a lot of times what we want to do is we want to just shoo it away. Oh, no, 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 I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. So what I would say is, I'm not saying that you have to do anything that's out of Islam, or anything of that nature. But I would say be more current. Listen to what the younger folks are doing. I try to keep myself current, especially because I teach younger students. I teach high school who are taking college courses, and I want to be current on the verbiage of what they're saying, right, and understand what they're saying, right. I'm not them, but if I understand their dialogue and what they're talking about, then it makes me more relatable and it makes me more relevant, right? And then they're more keen to listen to what I'm saying, right? So they can hear about my ancestors, right? I can start talking about the 400 years of the plight of the Black American in the United States. And I can also talk to them about being from kings and queens and what Africa looked like, right? And having those really intense conversations. And then they can give me information as well, right? We all learn from the cradle to the grave. So I think it's about really just saying, and I've been seeing this. I've been seeing it on social media. It was this one, I don't know if any of you saw it. It was this one woman, I believe she was Indo-Pak, and her daughter videotaped her. The woman must have been about in her early 60s. And she videotaped, the daughter videotaped the mother talking to her friend and talking about how Texas had invited the police chief to come and speak. And she said, do you understand how demeaning and degrading that was for Black folks who are being brutalized and murdered in the street, right? And so she shifted her thinking, right, of what her ideology was in the past. And so I say for folks to start shifting their thinking and align it with the Quran and Sunnah, and you will see more of a holistic approach happen and a more of an alignment happen with your grandchildren and your children.
That's great. Yeah, I think, all of your questions sort of tie back into being open-minded and open communication. I think that, that's also those are all very important things. And then, and like you ended with, just aligning our thinking with the Quran and the Sunnah, and, inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will guide us all on the right path. Well, thank you so much, Sister Kenyatta. That was very informative. Jazakallah khair.
Oh, yeah, I didn't want to be too wordy. I had more, but I was like, we got a time limit. So I'm gonna let
you did great.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So next, I'm going to be going ahead. Oh, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Imam Abdul Hafiz. So Imam Abdul Hafiz was born and raised in Gary, Indiana. He received his bachelor's in American history from Tuskegee University. Mashallah, he embraced Islam in 1970 while he was an undergraduate student. And after further training overseas, he joined the Federal Bureau of Prisons as one of its first Muslim staff chaplains in 1987. For over 2 decades, he continued to serve various federal prisons, and he retired as a supervisory chaplain in 2009. Currently, Imam Abdul Hafiz serves as Shura Council's Director of Prison Outreach Programs and Services. And he, leads the program, and he works with the county, state, and federal prison systems to secure the rights and fulfill the needs of Muslim inmates. He also represents Shura Council in all prison and criminal justice related initiatives, campaigns, and conferences. Imam Abdul Hafiz, we're very happy to have you here. So please, let me unmute you. All right, please welcome Imam Abdul Hafiz.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, Jazakallah khairan for the Islamic Center of the South Bay for putting on a program of this nature, as well as the panelists, the superb sisters who are doing work out in the field and uh, helping us to move the needle of Islam, here in the West and here in America in particular, and here in Southern California. It is definitely a pleasure to have this opportunity for us to have this conversation that is needed within our own community as well as is needed in the society. And one of the most phenomenal things that is occurring is that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, blessed is He, is giving us this opportunity to make this a better society, to make this nation what it can be, because inherently within our own faith, there is this total understanding and reality that we are all one. We're all the children of Adam, and Adam is from mud, and that there's no superiority, as our sister related the last sermon of the Prophet Islam, reminding us, and this is the season of Hajj, where we're consistently reminded of the Prophet's speech and his calling us to not feeling or having these attitudes of one being superior or inferior to the other. But one of the things that we as Muslims must recognize is we live in a society and we live in a nation where arrogance is all around us, and we're consistently hearing how America is the best place and the greatest of this and the greatest of that, and it can impact your own self and start thinking that you're better than somebody else because you're consistently hearing that, unless you counter that by being in the company of others who are reminded that I'm not better than anybody else because I have an education. I'm not better than anybody else because of the shade of my color, because of the language that I speak or the land in which I live in. But only through our faith can we consistently remind ourselves of this. One of the questions that had come up was how can we work together to decrease the inherent discrimination and prejudice and negative attitude? And one of the ways is by interacting with each other. Again, during the blessed season of Hajj, Muslims come from all over the world, interacting with each other, spending time together in simplistic garb, where they really truly see that they are just another brother and another sister. And in our masajid, we want to inculcate that same feeling that a brother and a sister is equal to us when we have a facility where different persons come within that atmosphere, and it's a matter of us consciously acting upon this is my brother and my sister, and I'm not looking at them outside of whether they speak the language I speak or not, and involving ourselves in activities like what happened last weekend on July 4th, where many persons from the different communities intrafaithfully came together for a cause. When I know the Islamic Center in the South Bay and many of the other masajids work with interfaith organizations feeding the poor and doing different activities. These are things that counter us staying in our segregated mindsets and biases and prejudices. So in order for one to get out of that, then be engaged, be involved, interacting with those from different communities, interacting with those of different faiths and different traditions, having our children to be exposed to these different realities when they witness their parents involved in crossing those cultural lines, then it gives them the courage that that's okay to be able to do those things. And they also see that that's the right thing to do. I mean, we as Muslims should be a voice for the voiceless and for the marginalized. One of the things, in the prisons and the jails that sometimes our community doesn't, understand or doesn't recognize is how Islam, for it to be within the jails and the prisons, which means it's in the crevices of the society. It's in the basic core of the society. And it didn't get there through osmosis. It didn't get there because they listened to YouTube or they listened to some speeches of some person, some charismatic individual. They got there through simplistic ways. And it is reaching African Americans who have brought the language of Islam into that environment, so that that's another aspect of Islamicizing the society, is when Islamic terminologies become a part of the normalcy of the society. And so these are some of the contributions that others make that sometimes we weren't aware of and we didn't acknowledge. But to know that these are the things that are going on in the field, and again being intertwined with our community is one of the ways that we can be able to address our prejudices and discrimination, inshallah. The other question that touched me was if we are targeted with a racial remark in a public space. Someone was asked that question. Sometimes this happens. It happens more to our sisters than it does to brothers from a lot of the reports of racial harassment. And my suggestion would be, for one thing, is to confront it, not to cower away from it. If it's an adult, then as an adult, then stand one's ground and let it be known that this is not going to be tolerated, this is not going to be accepted, to bring their attention to it so that others who may be in the environment, in the area, can be witnesses of this vile language or whatever gesture that was being made. If it's one of the children, one of the young people, then they should take it to an adult and bring it to an adult's attention, so that again this can be addressed. They should come home and discuss this with their parents, and parents should have this conversation with their children. Black families have had to have this conversation all of my life, and because these things can happen, and you want your child to be confident and to be secure within themselves, and to not let that become something that becomes a wound that they're never able to overcome. And this is what happens when one does just keep it within themselves and shy away. It can become something that lingers and festers and turns into a sore, and they become depressed. And there's so many negative things can come when one does not stand up for themselves and to speak out and bring it to the attention of others. The incidence of bullying is something that we know continually and consistently happens, and particularly it had begun, I think, with a lot of Muslim children in particular after 9/11. For the last 20 years, a lot of the children and adults even felt being bullied and talked to in negative ways. And again, this is something that parents want to teach their children, to be able to stand up for themselves, not to fight necessarily back, but to stand up for themselves, to let it be known that that's not acceptable, and to take it to an adult, take it to some authority so that it can be addressed. And for sure, to bring that to the attention of their parents. And the parents cannot allow that not to be addressed, in a school setting or recreation setting. They must, again, to give confidence to this young person that they are not going to be allowed to be placed in a situation, because this can become a part of their behavior as far as either themselves becoming a bully later. Oftentimes people who become bullies because they were bullied, or it can become an impediment to their self-esteem, that they, are beat down. They never become all that they could become because they were always, bullied and beat down, or their ideas were dominated by someone that was larger than them or more vociferous than themselves. Um, if somebody, dealing with color and race, one of the things that we all have to, be serious about and to understand, here in America, if one does not, understand the racism that's embedded and systemic in the educational system. Even for those who have come from other lands and other countries that were colonized, many of the European countries, they also were racist. And so they controlled the media, they controlled the movies, Hollywood, Bollywood. And so the light-skinned people were the ones that always were the stars, the heroes, were the ones that everybody, wanted to be like. And so this becomes a way, even though Islamically we should hold the character of somebody higher than what they look like, but we, again, are human beings, and we're very much influenced by these outside sources. And if the sources that we consistently see make brown people not pretty, make brown people not, successful, make dark people not successful, then everybody gravitates towards, I want to bleach my skin, because if my skin is lighter and whiter, then I get more privileges, I get more things that's going to happen for me. And this is reality in this Western world and in this society. And when you look at all of the magazines when you go to a bookstore or in the grocery store, you see these light-skinned people, and little girls, and they want to look like them, and boys want to look like the muscular-looking guys. And if they all look like these persons, then that's what they desire. Even if consciously they have beautiful parents at home and a family and values, but becomes an unconscious reality. And this is something that has affected and does affect Muslims as well, where you see them saying, I only want my child to marry somebody who was light skinned. And I know some of these sites have changed some of that because of pressure. But we have to, again, understand where it comes from, and understand that this is a reality. And the same thing when it comes to one looking at African Americans from a negative way. If your only understanding of African Americans have been movies, and the movies only show us as drug dealers, robbers, killers, murderers, drunkards, drug dealers, then that's your reality in your mind, is that is really a true image of African Americans, when that is not at all the case. And we have to again look at what has informed me about this other group. And when you look at the education system in America, it has not told the story of Black Americans. It has not given the true value of what it brought to this nation from its inception, that in every war that this nation has ever fought, Black Americans died and fought for this nation, every one of them, from before it was a nation until this time. And yet that's all absent, and so people don't know how heroic African Americans have been and are and continue to be, how they were creators and inventors of many of the facilities and the technology. Even through slavery, they were doing all of these great things. They built the cities. They built these big palaces and all of these, the foundation of America being the wealthiest nation that it is, on 400 years of free labor, that our people gave. And so when you don't understand that, and you only hear the narrative of somebody else, and even when you do hear that there were Muslims who were the slaves, they weren't just Muslim. These were scholars. These Muslims were, when you read some of the writings and the research that has been done, they were hafiz of Quran, and they were learned in many multiple disciplines, and as well as being mujahids. And they weren't just weaklings and people that you just got out of the bush, or just was a Muslim in name. And some of their stories were so profound that they told those stories to their children, and it did last for 300 years, that the story of where they were from was kept. And this is what Alex Haley was able to take from what his grandmother had told him about her grandmother and her grandfather, that he was able to go back to the actual village to see where he literally was from in Gambia. And so these realities, our community needs to know and to understand that, we have contributed, and so that way they will have a different attitude about their children playing with Black children, of their daughters or their sons marrying a Black person who has become Muslim and who loves Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and who loves this faith and who is, righteous and observant. That those should be the criterias, and not that we're the descendants of persons with darker hue, and so that makes us less. And so these are conversations that we must seriously have, with each other, so that we can grow together, and so that we can make sure that the children born here in America, the Muslim children, will bring about, inshallah, a most beautiful society that they would be a part of nurturing and developing, inshallah, because of us having programs like this where we can have conversations with each other and talk to each other and not see, beside each other. I've often gone to places and it was as if I was invisible, because the community members didn't speak back. They didn't re-greet when I said Salaam Alaikum. And many African Americans feel this way when they go into some of the different massages. Sometimes when our sisters go to, whether it's Eids or to marriages or weddings, and they separate the sisters from the brothers, they sit alone and nobody comes and sits beside them. And these are the things that we must change, within our own space, so that we really are inclusive of each other and embrace each other and cherish the value that we each bring. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes us, that he made us different colors and shades for the beauty that we are, and let us see that beauty, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair, Imam. Yeah, I think a couple of things that you touched on, are something we can all think about, is not just taking what the media feeds us, or, even just what we learn in school, or the kids learning when they're growing up. I think we need to dig deeper and do our own research. to truly understand, like you said, what the Black community has done for us as a country. That, and you're right, like those things are not taught in school. They're just completely skipped over, like it never happened. So, and I'm not talking about kids only. I mean, as adults too, I think we need to go back and read up on that. So Jazakallah khair for sharing that. It's always a pleasure listening to you. All right. So our last speaker tonight is going to be Sister Amina Mirza Ghazi. She's an attorney and activist in Southern California. She focuses on free speech, social and economic justice, discrimination, First Amendment, equal protection, and procedural due process issues. As the executive director of the LA chapter of the National Lawyers Guild, Amina has worked on protecting our rights to political protest and dissident speech, as well as movement building after the presidential election in November 2016. Formerly, she was the deputy executive director and staff attorney for CARE LA, the largest American Muslim civil rights and advocacy group. Amina has also spoken both nationally and internationally on civil rights issues affecting American Muslims, and she's given dozens of community workshops and presentations. I know she's spoken at our masjid many times. Prior to working at CARE, Amina's clerked with the United Auto Workers Legal Department, as well as for Wayne State University Disability Rights Clinic and Civil Rights Litigation Clinic. And Amina, she's a member of the California State Bar. She graduated with cum laude honors from Wayne State University School of Law, and she graduated magna cum laude from UCLA with a bachelor's in political science. She's also proudly served on the advisory board of the South Asian Network and the boards of the ACLU of Southern California and the Public Law Center. So with that, please welcome Sister Amina Ghazi.
Jazakallah khair, Ifra,
Here.
and the whole community for putting this together. I'd like to acknowledge Brother Abdul Hafiz and Sister Kenyatta. Thank you for your amazing work and sharing these words from your heart. We can't hear it enough. I also want to acknowledge the 50 or so people, mashallah, who have tuned in for this. This is an amazing turnout. Thank you for Jazakallah khair for taking this so to heart and for taking the time out on your evenings to join us on this issue. When we talk about joining movements, we talk about entry points, and I know for many of us, this recent events have been that initial entry point into understanding issues of racial injustice, mass incarceration, and police violence in the United States. For some of us, the entry points might have been later. For some of us, we have dear family and friends who are still not there yet. We can also think of on our paths of different radicalization points, even after we've entered and are aware of these issues. Many of us take the next step forward and are aware of what is involved, the stakes involved, and what we're willing to give up and put out there. And we radicalize, and radicalization has a deep history in this country and across the world of being a powerful force of change. There are also what I'll get into a little bit later, wearing points, where sometimes we just feel overwhelmed and worn down by what we're working on and working towards. And there are definitely strategies to use and address on that. Today I'm going to, some of the questions put forward by some of the community members were involved understanding a little bit more about the contributions of African Americans, specifically that we all benefit from today vis-a-vis civil rights, human rights. There was questions about internal community racism that Brother Abdul Hafiz and Sister Kenyatta addressed that I'll also touch upon. And then I'll also talk a little bit about some takeaways, things that we can do. First, I wanted to, Brother Abdul Hafiz was talking about children and how many in the community, in the Black community especially, raise children into aware of issues of discrimination. And it reminded me of a recent conversation I had with my son, who is almost 9 years old. Two of my children are biracial, half Black, half white. We adopted from foster care. And we were driving in the car one day, and he was sitting up in the passenger seat next to me. And like little 8-year-olds do, he looked over and saw that I was speeding. And he said, "Mommy, you're going above the speed limit. How fast can you go before, you get in trouble, the police come?" And I said, "Well, you know, we're in a residential place. You can probably go about 5 miles per hour over the speed limit. But once you start getting to 10, you know, you got to be really careful. That's kind of pushing the limit, and you'll probably get pulled over. And then I stopped. And then I said, okay, now here is part 2, the addendum. Young man, I'm sorry to tell you this, but it will be different for you because you are a young boy, black and brown boy. And you will be a young man, and those rules don't apply for you. And you might go 1 mile above the speed limit and still get pulled over by the police and still have extra police activity because of the color of your skin. And it's wrong, but that's the way it is in today's day and age. And no mother should have to tell her child that the reality is that they will be treated differently solely because of the color of their skin, because they are Black. But for decades and centuries, mothers in this country have had that conversation with their little boys and girls, that because of the color of their skin, they are more likely to attract overreactive police aggression, overreactive incarceration, overreactive suspensions and expulsions, and treatment from other people in a lot of disparate areas. And we have to understand that this is a living reality for many of our children and our brothers and our sisters. I think for us, this is really a time to evaluate how committed we are to this systemic change. Are we here because, is our entry point here because it's popular? It's a popular movement right now. You know, everyone's doing it because the social cost of not saying something on Facebook or on Twitter is too high. But once the populism of this time dies down a little bit, once the rhetoric of the Trump administration and the white racists might die down a little bit, will we still be around to ensure that systemic change does happen? That we are here to dismantle these destructive systems of power and discrimination that have been around for far, far, far too long? Are we here to just make sure that certain people get thrown out of power? Or are we here to overthrow these corrupt systems of laws and put something better in place? So it's a test of our commitment, and that's what I call radicalization point. What are we willing to put forward and to put out there to ensure that this change happens? Brother Abdul Hafiz, Imam Abdul Hafiz talked about the heroic activities of African Americans through history, and that many continue to be at the forefront, leading our nation towards understanding and realizing the ideals that it purported from the beginning. I'm going to go over a couple of these. Forgive me if it feels like a history lesson, but it all ties together when we talk about strategies. So during the time of slavery, at the end, the Civil War, there was the passage, we have our Constitution. Our Constitution can get amended. That's how we get amendments. It basically changes to the Constitution. So we had the 13th Amendment, which emancipated slaves and outlawed slavery in the United States. We have the 14th Amendment, which allowed for due process of law and equal protection in all the states. And then we have the 15th Amendment, which essentially gives the right to vote to, at that time, all men, but all citizens. Even after these amendments were passed, you have the growth of the Jim Crow era and consistent suppression of Black Americans across the United States, particularly in the South. So with the growth of the Civil Rights Movement in 1954, 1955, you had seminal cases, Brown v. Board of Education, the first one and the second one. The first said that separate is inherently not equal. You probably heard that a lot. The second, Brown v. Board of Education in 1955, said that schools have to desegregate with all deliberate speed. Because of the Civil Rights Movement, we have the Civil Rights Act of 1964. If you are a Muslim man and you go to work, you are able to wear your beard, a Muslim woman, her hijab, you're able to pray, you're able to go into a public space and have redress if you're discriminated against because of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So many of the rights that we enjoy as American Muslims is because of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Similarly, just a year later, there was the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which dealt away with race-based suppression of voters. Essentially, what was happening is that there were literacy tests. That was a big deal. There were literacy tests that people couldn't vote until they could prove that they could read, which affected a huge population of African Americans. At the same time of these legislative and legal victories, I think it's really important to understand from the beginning the history of resistance in this country. You go back and during the slave period, there 1831, the Nat Turner Revolt, and Nat Turner was a slave who escaped and who got about 75 people to join him, and they murdered and killed their slave owners and were fighting for freedom. You have Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad to emancipate slaves, take them. You have the bus boycotts, the sit-ins, the freedom rides, Malcolm X and the Nation and Islam, and their fiery demands against white supremacy in America. You have the 1968 uprisings, 1967 and then 1968 uprisings after the assassination of Martin Luther King that demanded economic rights. You have the 1992 uprisings in Los Angeles that a lot of people refer to riots, but it was essentially the Black population saying after Rodney King's abusers, he was nearly killed by the cops, and they were exonerated from the legal system, saying you've had enough. And now you have the Black Lives Matter movement, which Sister Kenyatta and many have been so passionately involved with. We're doing die-ins on the 405 freeway and the 110 freeway, who had decolonized LA City Hall for months out there, and intense saying, you know, this has got to stop. The history and story of resistance led by our Black brothers and sisters is just as red, white, and blue as anything else in this country. And as different and these approaches might seem, the legislative side versus the, you know, the resistance side, we have to understand that they are complementary approaches as well. There's a great story about how in 1965, when Martin Luther King Jr. was imprisoned in Selma, Malcolm X came down to give a talk, and Coretta Scott King was there as well. And Malcolm X said in an aside to Coretta Scott King, he said he wanted to visit Martin Luther King Jr., but he couldn't. He had to leave for a conference. But he said, I came to Selma to make, please tell him, I didn't come to Selma to make his job more difficult, Martin Luther King Jr.'s job more difficult. But I thought that if the white people understood what the alternative was, meaning Malcolm X, they would be more inclined to listen to your husband. There was strategy involved. There was thought put into understanding how to achieve justice, how to achieve rights, and not throwing each other under the bus, to work with each other. So the reason I bring that up is because, you know, the last couple months, people have said, you know, people are destroying property and this and that, and, you know, peaceful protests, only peaceful protests. And really that is a call for the movement makers, those leading the movement, to make. But I want the rest of us to take a step back and understand that Malcolm X did say by any means necessary. And who are we to judge those tactics? Who are we to say that it's too much? Because when we say that it's too much, it's gone too far, we are against really saying that, and when I say we, I mean non-Black folk, I mean allies. We are saying we don't understand really the cost, the lives that have been taken. And so some of the questions were about, why do we have this internal community racism? And I would say that, you know, with the rise of the civil rights movement, there was immigration reform, the Immigration Reform Act of 1965, that really opened up. So in the middle of this, you have a swath of immigrants coming from different parts of Asia, and some from Africa, and less from Europe. What happened with a lot of the immigrant population during this time of social upheaval and unrest is we are leaving something worse, or in the minds of those We are leaving something to get to something better, the land of opportunity. And the way we do that is we buy in and we try to achieve our privilege. We're going to try and make it work. We're going to try and make money. And this is not a dig on anyone, but I think we need to understand that I don't think there was a conscious disregard of what was going on. It was, I think, a lot of how do we make it? Who do we need to appease? Who do we need to make happy in terms of the white social class, the white people, folks in power? And then after 9/11, I feel that American Muslims, we lost our cosmopolitanism. We lost our biting critique of American foreign policy. And we became pacifists again. I've heard so many times within our Muslim organizations, we need to protect them. We need to promote the image of Islam. We need to promote the image of Muslims. But who are we promoting the image to? Who are we worried about what we look, who we look, how we look? Who are we trying to appease? And the answer has always been implicitly, not explicitly, we are trying to appease the white majority to protect our social status. And I think not until about 2009, 2010, when I was dealing with a lot of the FBI cases and we had informants and surveillance, did a shift really start happening within the Muslim community of, oh, wait a second. We're not included in the upper tiers of society. We're not. So now what? And it has been this awakening movement. And again, I talk about entry points and we honor all of our entry points. So we're here now. We understand this, but I think we need to understand as well that we can't go backwards to, we can't say we're going to, we can't say that we're going to fight for justice. We can't say that we're going to dismantle systems of power and oppression. And at the same time saying we're trying to promote the image of Muslims. We're trying to make ourselves look good. It's contradictory. And I'll give you an example. In 2009, there was a Pew study, and it was called American Muslims Made Middle Class and Mainstream. Now, without going into the statistics of the study, which are pretty benign, but just how does that sound to you? Middle class and mainstream, mainly middle class and mainstream. But I have to ask ourselves, if being mainstream means condoning a racialized system of control that devalues Black and brown bodies, what honor is there being in mainstream? I would rather be a dissident voice, a radical dissident voice calling for change, than patting myself on the back and say, hey, we're middle America, we're all mainstream. But I do think the reality is that over 10 years later, I do think the character of the American mainstream has been shifting, has been changing. To say that enough is enough, that the system of racialized control has to be broken down, has to go away. Years ago, when I was at CARE, we did a civil rights priority survey. We asked the Muslim community in the greater Los Angeles area, what are the civil rights issues that are important to you? Something that was a high priority for those on staff, but it scored very low on this informal survey, were prisoner rights and accommodation. It scored extremely low. Also, in terms of the respondents to the survey, again, it's not scientific, it was informal, but still the number of people who identified as Black or African American was extremely low as well. And I have to ask all of us here, if we were to issue the survey again, if CARE was to send out the Civil Rights Priority Survey, could we make protecting prisoner rights and accommodation, giving the right to vote to those who are out on parole, allowing them to get jobs and housing, could we make that a priority? Would that come in as number one? Again, how committed are we to this? So what do we do now? And I'm probably at the end of my time, so I'll just talk a little bit of the few key points. When you're out there, don't look away. If you have looked away before, don't look away. You see a homeless person, don't look away. You see someone sitting on the curb with their hands their head between their knees, being questioned by the police, don't look away. Look straight at the situation, look at it head on. question, record, and support. Question the police officers or whatever situation it is. Take out your cell phone and record, and then see if you can give any post-incident of support to those who were affected. I've done this. I've pulled over. And one particular incident locally, there were 4 or 5 brown men who were sitting on the curb with police cars around, and I circled around the block and got out of the car. By that time, they were put in the police vehicles, so there wasn't much to document with my phone, but I talked to a witness there about what was happening, and they told me about the situation. It was actually another Latino man who called the officers, which is another thing I hope to address in a minute. Going back to promoting our image, what we need to switch to is advancing what's called our hidden narratives. Those stories about us, by us, for us, not answering the questions of the majority white American public, of not responding to how we're portrayed, but we decide how we're portrayed. Those narratives within our community, and within that, because we are a mixed demographic community, because our brothers and sisters, we have brothers and sisters who are Black American, to elevate Black voices within those narratives, because African American Muslims are the largest portion of our population. So always within those hidden narratives within our community, to elevate Black voices, to strategically use our privilege for those of us with privilege, which I think is the majority of us on this call have some level of privilege, to strategically deploy it. So we're here, we have our jobs, we're on the PTA, we're doing this, we're doing that, to use that privilege to open up spaces for underrepresented folks and to dismantle discrimination and systems of oppression. I would understand your wariness point, so also be strategic by power mapping your area, your neighborhood, know who the players are, the civic organizations, understand your sphere of influence, those who, a sphere of influence are people you can easily influence. Some of us try to work on things that we can't really make a difference on, so focus on what you can make a difference on, and then slowly expand it. It's really outlined well in Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Influential People, I believe. Sister Kenyatta talked about the need for resources. We need to address these capital discrepancies within our communities and between the suburbs and the inner cities. We need to send in money. We need the infrastructure, the groups are there, the people are there, the movement is there. Sometimes it's just lack of ability to have as much of an impact because of the lack of resources. And lastly, I want to say that just like Islam is a way of life, within Islam is anti-racism. It's a way of life. It's not something we do, we sign into Facebook and we're anti-racist for those 5 cents. It's a way of life, a way of being. So we have to dig more into our history, get more politically educated. We have to bring our own struggles, our own strengths. But of course, we have to understand that at the end of the day, the most invidious form of discrimination and oppression is that of Black folk in this country. It's been around for centuries, and when Black lives when they truly matter, when Black lives are liberated, the rest of us will feel those freedoms too. So Jazakallah khair, and forgive me for going a bit over time.
Jazakallah khair, Amina. Yeah, I think you touched on some really good points. Educating ourselves about the history, and really looking at, like you said, the civil rights movement and so many other things that you kind of refresher. I think by realizing that in itself will help us in just being more, supportive of the Black community and our own Muslim community. So thank you for sharing that. That was very beneficial. Okay, perfect. So we do have a couple questions from some of our guests, but before I do that, we have Father Alexi here. Would you like to just share something with us, your thoughts? I'm going to go ahead and unmute. If you're not familiar with him, he's one of our interfaith partners for the last, I think, like 40 so years.
Well, maybe not 40 years or so, but
Okay.
a few years. Thank you very much. It's been a wonderful evening. I must say, I couldn't disagree with anything that was said tonight. I think that we are all in these struggles for civil rights and social justice together. And many times when your speakers were talking about Muslim this or Muslim that, I could easily have inserted Christian this and Christian that. The message would have been the same. We must stand together for all of these things. Thank you so much for having me tonight. Thank
you for joining us tonight. Thanks for sticking around. So, all right. So we're going to just go ahead and move forward with the Q&A. I'm going to go ahead and pose the question. Amina, Imam Abdul Hafiz, and Kenyatta, if you guys want to just unmute yourselves and go ahead and chime in, feel free. So one of the questions is from one of our community members. It says, do you think that as long as our property taxes support the local schools, we are by default guaranteeing racial disparity in education and opportunity? And more broadly, is racism primarily a consequence of wealth disparity rather than one's skin color, even among Muslims? Anyone?
From an educator's perspective, that's a really great question. So the property taxes are according to how much your property value is, right? What I believe can be done is, that's why I said, people can travel out of their spaces, but you can basically say at the board meetings of the Los Angeles Unified School District, I live in Torrance, or wherever you live, and say, my property taxes are supporting this public school that has so many resources. Why is it that the schools in South Central are not receiving the same equitable money? And why can't we vote or have a vote to be given on our next ballot, right? And that's where you would speak to your council members and say that we would like to have a portion of our monies to be given to those lower economic spaces so that they can have an even playing field, right? It starts with the voice of the people. So if you vocalize, and there's enough people that are vocalizing, the reason why we have systemic change happening, and the other guest speakers did a beautiful job. You guys spoke exactly what I was thinking, and I wouldn't have had enough time to say all of those things, so thank you. It's the people's voice. So the people being out in the streets and demanding, that's why you're seeing change. That's why you're seeing the police be defunded by $150 million because of Black Lives Matter's people's budget, right? And this has been happening since 2015. People think that we just started doing it. So it's that constant in your face saying, no, this is an injustice and it needs to change. The second part, I'll let someone else speak because I don't like to speak too much and just take over. So if someone else wants to speak to that, they can. And I would love to answer the next question about the protest, but I'll be quiet right now.
Yeah, I think in terms of the second part of the question about, is racism primarily a consequence of wealth disparity rather than one's skin color, even amongst Muslims? Well, I would address racism in this country, not specific to the Muslim community. I have this this book by an old law school professor of mine. It was written in 2004, and he was arguing for the atonement and redress for the African-American community. And he wrote, slavery and slave-like conditions under which free Blacks lived denied these Blacks life and liberty, basic capital, plus an estate, so financial, human, and social capital, to bequeath to their heirs. So essentially, because of slavery, there wasn't basic life and liberty, there wasn't financial, human, or social capital to pass on to the next generation of Blacks. Second, Jim Crow forced their descendants, who had little capital to begin with, into worse jobs, worse housing, and worse educational systems, the effects of which are very much in evidence today. So I think that I would say definitely that the lack of capital and wealth is more a byproduct of the systems of the racial caste system in this country rather than the other way around.
And if folks could read, I have a book that I would love for folks to read, Black Wealth, White Wealth, which is by Melvin Oliver and Thomas Shapiro. That is a really detailed account, and Amina did a great job of giving an overview. But if you want to go further and really understand the redlining that occurred in this country, and that Black folks were only allowed to live in certain spaces and weren't even allowed to get loans, right, for property, and that generational wealth was not able to be even attained. Or when you think about Black Wall Street, right, if you think about Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921, and how whites burned that down, and this was a thriving community, right, that had a bank and stores and different systems that were in place. So if that's burned down, then that also burns down generational wealth. Yeah, so it's Black Wealth, someone asked in the chat, it's Black Wealth, White Wealth by Melvin Oliver and Thomas Shapiro. So that would be a great book to look at. But I don't want to, I feel like I'm talking too much.
You're fine, you're
I
fine.
can talk about the protest, but I'll let people when somebody else interjects.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and ask the next question. So, like Sister Kenyatta was talking about, so someone had asked, now that the protests have slowed down and there are no more black boxes on our social media pictures, what should we do now? What steps can we take to continue the momentum and keep fighting for justice? I think that's a great question. So, take it away, Sister Kenyatta.
I was feeling like I was too much space.
Oh, you.
So I would say that the protests have not slowed down. It's just the appearance of them slowing down, right? So for Black Lives Matter, we have a protest in front of Jackie Lacey, GA Jackie Lacey's office at 211 West Temple every Wednesday, and it's an earlier time from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. For those of you who don't know, Jackie Lacey is the current district attorney for Los Angeles, and there have been 609 cases since 2012 of deaths that have occurred from LAPD, as well as the sheriffs, as well as our county jails, right? So we are saying to Jackie Lacey, we do not want to reelect her in November because she has not prosecuted killing cops, right? Now we know that there's something that's called qualified immunity, right? Qualified immunity is this term that protects police officers from frivolous claims, right? But murder is not a frivolous claim. And once these claims have been brought to the police commission's space, they've even ruled, I believe, 3 or 4 of them out of policy. And Jackie Lacey still decided not to prosecute. You can also go to the police commission online. They have their meetings at 9 o'clock on Tuesday, and you can voice your concerns in a comment, and they will share that comment. So there's many ways to be able to be active, whether it's online, whether it's calling your council members, whether it's calling the governor. I have to commend the governor. Newsom is in the process of releasing 8,000 people from the jails, and that's not just because he decided because of his good heart. This is, as Amina could probably speak to, years and years of people advocating and lobbying for people to be free. And so COVID-19 has allowed them to kind of reevaluate people's cases. So a lot of nonviolent people are being released. But I also want to lift up really quickly, Black folks in this country. They are 1 million Black people out of 2.3 million people in the United States that are in prison. 1 million, over half. And a lot of them are for minor infractions. So Black folks are always put in a category of a higher charge of and being incarcerated at higher levels. So I could go on and on about that, but you can read The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, and she gives a really deep account, about 400 pages, about what the incarcerated system is about.
Okay, if anybody has any questions that they'd like to ask, you're welcome to unmute yourself. Do the speakers have anything else they want to add on?
Yeah, I'm seeing a comment by Brother Milad. It's addressed to me, so I'll go ahead and read it. It says, Assalamu alaikum, Sister Amina. Thank you for your presentation. I really appreciate it. The one thing I take issue with is your comment that it's not our place to question the looting and destruction of property that has taken place in the context of, if I'm going too fast, you can read it along with me. Recent cases of police brutality, citing Malcolm X's slogan, by any means necessary. In Islam, the ends don't justify the means. That is a Machiavellian concept. We must effect positive change while obeying the law and applying the prophetic sunnah. Jazakallah khair, Brother Milad, for that comment. I agree with it. I think another avenue to look at this issue is through the context of what it means to be an ally in this moment. Allyship means, for those of us who are not directly impacted by the systems of mass incarceration, those of us who are not Black Americans, what does it mean to be a good ally? And within that context of allyship is not to question the tactics, considering the legacy of the radical legacy within the movement for Black liberation in this country. I think, you know, if a young Pakistani sister went and threw you know, went and did something, I would say, hey, sister, you know, what's up? You know, we could have that conversation. But I think it's more a question of where do we see ourselves in terms of being allies. And I think the issue that often happens is within these spaces is that non-Black folks step up and try to lead the conversation, try to lead the strategical conversation, the tactical conversation, instead of, I'm not saying that this is what you're doing and anything, but in terms of what I've seen and done, you know, with the Black Lives Matter movement and White People for Black Lives and API for Black Lives, which were both allied groups, is the role that allies should play in these conversations. And, you know, I think within it, it's been this debate. I mean, you take, you know, W.E. Du Bois, who is, you know, very much more the radical than Booker T. Washington. You know what I mean? This debate within the Black community has been going on for quite some time. And so I think it's a question of where do us ally folks fall within that conversation. And honestly, it's not in the middle of that conversation, in my view. And it's been bothersome to me to watch, you know, CNN reporters say, well, this is a peaceful protest, this protest is peaceful, and this protest is peaceful. And it feels like the media is forcing the protesters into this box where their protest is only legitimate if it qualifies as peaceful, according to the white majority media. That's how I feel about that. And if you'd like to respond, I'd be happy to read your comment. Or
All right, perfect. Jazakallah khair both to Sister Amina, Imam Abdul Hafiz, and Sister Kenyatta. I think, you know, I know for me this was very beneficial. It's almost like sort of just a reminder that, one, we need to look inside ourselves and you know, we all have internal biases, whether we like to say, oh, I'm not racist, you know, anything like that. We all have them. It's unconscious a lot of times. So it's a great reminder for all of us to, you know, try to be more cognizant of our actions, things that we say. And inshallah, you know, everyone learned something from this and can, you know, take some of these things and continue moving forward. And, you know, like you said, the protests haven't stopped. So let's not quiet down. Let's keep our, you know, get our voices heard and inshallah make changes. So this was really good. I know Sister Hasina just said, I hope we can have another session. Yeah, I feel like there's so much more that needs to be discussed. So inshallah, we'll definitely, you know, consider having another session. So I would like to have Mirza Uncle just come on and make some closing remarks before we end off. Mirza Uncle?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, there's an echo. I don't know if you have two sounds on.
You should be fine now.
Can you hear me?
There's still a lot of echo.
It looks like it. How is the sound now?
It's better.
Okay, listening to the. Can you hear me?
Yeah, this is fine.
You can hear me, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, excellent. What a productive evening. And even though it's online on COVID, I feel like locking the doors and tell the security guards, don't let nobody out. It's going to be a all-night session. Very productive and very thought-provoking. A lot of subjects got discussed and a lot of subjects got left out. So, including Father Alexis, a promise has to be made for the panel to come back. And the only way the panel will come back if the demand from the community is breaking the doors. So I appreciate the comments, even though it was from one of my own daughter, Hasina, that we should have another program. So please send the comments to ICSB demanding another session. And inshallah, we'll set it up. And Jazakumullah khair, may Allah reward, may God Almighty reward Father Alexei. You gave a lot of your precious time. We appreciate. And Sister Kenyatta, Brother Abdul Hafiz, and Amina, you don't matter. So, thanks a bunch, and inshallah we should join pretty soon. Jazakumullah khair.
Jazakallah khair, Mirza Uncle. Well, I think that concludes it. Does anybody have any other comments before I cut somebody off?
I was just going to interject really quickly. If folks want to understand more of Black Lives Matter LA, you can go to Black Lives Matter Los Angeles, either our website or the Instagram and Facebook. You can go to Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative. Our website is muslimart.org, or you can go to our Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Muslim Art. And thank you, someone, you put it in the chat, thank you. And if folks would like to go in more in depth with workshops or webinars, we are doing everything online right now because of COVID-19. But we would love for folks to come and join. And also we have membership. You can do $15 a month, and we have webinars there that give a great overview of some of the things that I was speaking to. So thank you for that shameless plug. Thank you.
Perfect. All right. Jazakallah khair to all of you for spending your Friday night with us, and hopefully learning something from this. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward all of our speakers and all of you for joining and listening. With that, I think that is it. I think that concludes our program. So I know most of you, I've seen a lot of these familiar names, so I know you guys have been familiar with our virtual programs going on, but just, another reminder, we have 2 more sessions of our Tuesday night Purification of the Heart with Mufti Wasim Khan. So Tuesday nights after Maghrib as well on the WebEx platform. So if you haven't been joining in, please, try to join in. There are 2 more left, and they've been really great. So you don't want to miss that. And then, of course, our Friday family nights. So we'll see you guys again, inshallah, soon. With that, everyone have a great evening, and See you next time. Assalamualaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
I can